What's up, you guys? Thank you guys so much for clicking back onto my channel. Today we're gonna talk about something that I know all of you are very interested in. I've gotten a lot of questions. 5 tips that are gonna help improve your peak week. Cue intro. So before we get into those 5 tips, let's just quickly address something very important. Peak week is not as sexy as everybody makes it out to be. Everybody thinks that peak week is some magical week that is gonna help get you shredded. And if you are ready before peak week, yeah, it is gonna do a lot in regards to your fullness and how you're gonna look on stage. But I have to tell you, if you still have 5, 10, even a few pounds to lose by peak week, it's not gonna do too much. It's not gonna be a secret magical week that's automatically just gonna get you shredded. So at the end of the day, the importance of peak week is honestly gonna just depend on how ready you are. All right, tip number 1, we're gonna talk about your water intake. Now I've talked about this in a couple of videos before, but for sake of convenience, we're just gonna retouch on it here. You actually don't have to cut water. People cut water as an attempt to get rid of the water that's held outside of the cell. You have water inside the muscle and outside of the muscle. The water that's stored inside of the muscle is what makes you look full, and it's what makes you appear more shredded. The water that is outside of the muscle typically can result in you typically looking kind of washed out and that you have spilt over. I'm sure you've heard that term before, that you look like you've spilled over. So when people cut water, that's what they're trying to do, but you actually can't control where the water comes from. It's gonna come from inside and outside of the cell. It's not just gonna be just the outside of the cell when you go to cut water. So people who do cut water, who are natural athletes, typically they look really washed out and flat on stage, and you typically hear that they can't get a pump backstage after, and that they look so much better a few days after their show, and they chalk it up to the fact that they've had more carbs. Well, it's actually not from the carbs that are making you look more full post-show. It's actually due from the water and sodium consumption post-show. So cutting water is a very old school mentality, and there has been new research to indicate that it is not necessary. So what do you do for water then? People freak out when it comes to water. Honestly, you want to keep it as consistent as possible. So right now, for example, I am consuming 4 liters of water, and I have been for the last 12 weeks. I'm going to continue to consume 4 liters of water all the way up until the end of my peak week. So you want to keep it as consistent as possible. So yes, tracking your water intake is very important, because some people, they'll consume 5 liters of water, and those are very normal for people who have more active jobs. I have a very sedentary lifestyle, so consuming that much water isn't necessary for me. And there's even people who have even more sedentary jobs, and they're sitting around even more than I am, so maybe 2 to 3 liters of water is more normal for them. So making sure that whatever your intake is throughout your entire prep is consistent all the way up until the end of peak week. Now there are some situations that you can manipulate your water just a little bit during peak week, and this is just going to depend strictly on your physique. So if you find you're too hard, and this is typically the case for a lot of bikini competitors. Bikini, you're not supposed to be super hard, and you're not supposed to be super vascular. So if you find that you are super hard going into a show during peak week, then it does make sense to cut your water, but not a dramatic amount that everybody does, where you cut your water Friday night for a full 12 hours, some people even 24 to 30 hours. You just want to do a moderate cut, so scale back your water intake and taper it off throughout the week, and then the day of your show just sipping on water. Now in contrast, if you have spilt over, so for example, say you've done your prejudging the morning of your show and you notice that you have spilt over, and you are going to try to recuperate and recover for the nighttime show. When you find this happens, it's very difficult to recover from a spillover, but a good strategy to allow you to do this is actually to drink more water. You actually want to dramatically increase your water intake in between the morning and the nighttime show, and increase your amount of pump ups and even your sodium intake from morning to night as well. This is obviously going to depend on the person. Everybody is different, so it's very difficult for me to give you a direct percentage of how much water you should actually increase, but you just really want to pay attention to your body. But people think that cutting water is going to reduce the spillover, but it's actually the opposite. You actually want to increase increase your water intake and really increase your pump up sessions throughout the rest of the day, and that's really gonna help you as best as you can to recover from a spillover. Number 2, we're gonna talk about sodium now. It's crazy to me that people still think that you need to cut sodium when it comes to your peak week. You've already technically have been cutting your sodium throughout the entire prep, because as your calories get lower, typically you have to take a more holistic approach to nutrition, regardless if you're tracking your macros or not. More whole-based foods are actually gonna be a lot more voluminous, so you can eat more food to help keep you full. By doing this, you're already actually technically cutting your sodium, because more processed foods are typically higher in sodium. So throughout your prep, you are already cutting down your sodium, which is making it very difficult to get a pump when you're working out, and you typically look very flat. So by cutting your sodium even further during peak week doesn't make any sense, because when you get to the point where you're ready to step on stage, you don't want to look flat, you don't want to not have a pump or not look vascular. For figure and up bikini girls, you don't have to worry about looking vascular, but for people who do have a requirement to look more vascular, cutting sodium is going to give you the opposite effect. So you actually want to try to keep your sodium as consistent as possible throughout peak week. So that's very tough from the beginning of the prep, because your sodium may be at 3,000 milligrams, but by the time you come to the end of the prep, you might be closer to 2,000 or 1,500. What I would do is average out your intake of sodium for maybe the last 2 weeks before peak week, and then take that amount and ensure that you are hitting it during your peak week to ensure that you are staying consistent again with your sodium intake. Now, there are strategies that you can utilize in order to manipulate your sodium. Again, this is just going to depend on your overall physique and the category you're competing in. So for bikini girls, some bikini girls, they look too muscular, they look too vascular and too hard. So if this is the case, then yes, doing a taper of your sodium throughout peak week makes sense, because it's going to allow you to look a lot more softer, which is overall the look that they're going for bikini. But for all the other categories, you don't want to look soft, so cutting out your sodium doesn't make any sense, because that's exactly what it's going to do. It's going to make you look more soft. But in the reverse, there are some bikini girls who don't have a lot of muscle, they're a little bit skinnier going into the show, so increasing their sodium amount above their maintenance levels during peak week makes sense, because it's going to allow them to look a lot more full, is going to allow them to get a better pump backstage, so that they can kind of hold their own when they go out on stage and they don't look too lean and too skinny. All right, next we're going to talk about food. So whether you're tracking your macros or you're taking a more holistic approach to nutrition, peak week is not the week that you want to be experimenting with new foods and new recipes. Why? Because like I said, you want to keep your sodium, water, and actually even your potassium levels as consistent as possible throughout peak week. Peak week should be super easy. Just be consistent and do what you've been doing for the last few weeks. It's not the time to experiment and try new things. You're just going to screw up your intakes, and it's going to stress you out even more when you feel like you haven't consumed enough sodium or you've consumed too much sodium, depending on your protocol. So ensure that you are just eating the same foods that you've been eating for the last few weeks to ensure that everything stays in check. All right, number 4, cardio and resistance training. So for cardio, this is really just going to depend on how much you are doing. If you are doing a crap load of cardio in order to get lean, you definitely want to try to taper it off a little bit. But if you're not doing a lot of cardio, maybe it's a lot of lifts, then it is okay to maybe keep that throughout the week. But any HIIT cardio, I recommend tapering that off. Maybe finish your last session at the very beginning of the week and then tapering it off so you're not doing any the rest of the week. You definitely don't want your legs swelling at all, and you want to make sure that you give your body enough time to let the water out of your legs so you're not holding unnecessary water when you step on stage. And for resistance training, same thing with your food. This is not the time to try new exercises. It's not the time to go rock climbing or try CrossFit if you've never done it before, or start deadlifting when you've never deadlifted before. It's also not the time to be hitting PRs and doing any failure exercises. The point of training during peak week is not for you to kill yourself. This is just for you to get a pump and to get moving a little bit. So I would honestly just try to keep your split as consistent as possible. If you have just a leg day or a lower body day, I recommend putting that to the beginning of the week. So if you normally train on Thursday, put it to like a Sunday or the Monday at the beginning of your peak week. This is just as an attempt to keep the swelling of your legs down, and you don't want to be super sore when you go to step up on stage. And then just keeping the rest of your split pretty consistent throughout the week, getting a light pump in there and making sure that you remove all failure training. You don't want to be sore when you step up on stage. All right, and lastly, show day, the most important day and the day we've been working so hard towards, right? When it comes to your water on show day, You definitely just want to be sipping on water. Now, people will argue saying that, well, you're manipulating water when you just said not to manipulate water and to keep it consistent. The reason why I recommend just sipping on water during show day is because you're gonna be stressed out. If you have water in front of you, you're gonna drink it, and it could actually lead to you drinking even more water than you actually have been in the past. So by being stressed out, you're gonna do abnormal things, and it's gonna put yourself at risk of increasing your regular water intake. So I recommend just having a water bottle there and having a straw in your water bottle so it'll allow you to sip on it versus chugging your water back because you feel stressed out. And take it from me, any bikini girls or even figure or women's physique, you definitely do not want to be peeing every hour. As little as you have to pee, the better, because it is a pain in the ass. I'm just gonna let you think about why that is for a second. You do not want to be peeing on show day. And then on show day, again, don't cut your sodium. Have your regular amount that you have been having for the last few weeks. And just a sodium timing strategy that I recommend is to have a good amount of sodium about 10 to 15 minutes before you enter the pump up room, because that is when the sodium intake is gonna be most optimal. That's when you want to be pumped up, is just before you go out on stage. So versus having a good amount of sodium like 4 hours before you step on stage, have a good amount of it 10 to 15 minutes before you step on stage. It'll really allow you to get a good pump backstage. And then lastly, just enjoy yourself. You've been working so hard towards this. You might as well try to enjoy show day just a little bit. And I think if you implement some of these strategies for peak week, it's really gonna take a lot of stress off of you. So after the show, go enjoy yourself. I recommend implementing a strategy of what you were gonna eat. So say you want a whole pizza and 2 beers. Actually quantifying it like this is really gonna help ensure that you don't overeat. If you say that I'm gonna go out and eat everything in sight, I promise you, you're gonna be sick and it's not gonna be worth it. Enjoy yourself, be consistent, don't do anything crazy. If you have a coach that is making you do things that are crazy, question everything, and if they can't give you a legitimate reason as to why besides because I said so, it's not worth it. You guys don't do it, okay? This is your life, this is your body, and a lot of people have ended up sick. Some people have ended up dying. This is your health. Stepping on stage is just a show. Your health is more important, so take care of yourself first and foremost. Hope this was helpful, you guys. If you have any questions, please comment down below. I love hearing from you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.